Thanks, James.
No.
And thanks, Matt. Watching him run around has been kind of exciting. I hope you like my slide. It's the only one I brought, so you're going to be looking at it for 45 minutes. So you can either look at the slide, look at me, look at each other. So I'm Corey. I have been managing software developers for about 20 years, mostly in small startups, in quite a few startups. I'm sorry, Matt, I can't stand still when I talk, so I'll do the best I can. Mostly in small startups, some of which have grown to be large companies, virtually all of which then fired me. So I have a thing that I do, and it's not in large companies, it's in small companies. But what I love doing is managing software developers, and I have a lot of thoughts on that. And rather than subject you to all my thoughts, though, my hope today is to actually have a bit of a conversation with all of you. So anybody who wants to come in closer, feel comfortable doing so. If you're shy, I won't be offended. But what I'd like us to do to start is, can I get everybody to stand up? Apparently I can. Okay, what I'd like you to do is to turn to someone near you in your row, or someone you can speak to without screaming. Introduce yourself if you don't know them, and then tell them something that you want to learn. Something that you're hoping to learn in the next, 6 months, in the next year, in your life. Just something that, when you have a chance, you're going to try and learn how to do this or get better at, okay? Go. Awesome, awesome. If you haven't had a chance to tell your partner what you want to learn, make them shut up and talk at them. Okay, okay. Have a seat, wrap up. I mean, don't just, silence, but. So it's been a lot of great talks today, a lot of pretty interesting stuff. I'm kind of a buff of military history, so Emily's talk was really exciting for me. We've heard a lot about how important it is to have a vision, how important it is to invest in your team, ideas around autonomy. Kevin's talk was great on what they're doing at Avo. I always love seeing Confluence pages. For some reason, that's like a nostalgic thing for me. I've spent so much time screaming at Confluence. I know we've been through this before, but I'm just going to ask you to one more time. People who are in a leadership role, if you're a manager or a team lead, if you basically have responsibility over people, can you just put your hand up, please? Oh, that seems like more than we had before. Maybe some people got promoted. Can you leave your hands up? Leave your hands up. I want to see something. Okay, so all of you, when you think about the time you spend managing, like if you're a 50-50 individual contributor manager, I'm just talking about the management time. How many of you would say that you spend at least 50% of that management time in a reactive rather than a proactive way? That is, putting out fires, dealing with people coming to you, writing performance reviews, that sort of stuff. How many people would say you spend at least half your time that way? Okay, okay, most of you. How many would say at least 75%? Not so many. Okay, you folks are better than me. Anybody here would say 90% or more? You'll notice my hand is still up. Okay, great, I'm bad. Anyways, a thing that happens very often to us when we move into management is that we start to get more reactive. It's just a thing. When you're an individual contributor, you're taking on action, you're moving forward stuff. When you're a manager, a lot of your time is spent with people coming up to you and saying, hey, I need you to help me deal with this thing. I'm curious to hear from the group, those of you, whether you're managers or not, What leads to that? Why do managers spend more than half their time being reactive? What comes up when we think of that? Yeah. Sure. Yeah, you end up being like a hub of communication. Absolutely. That's a thing that a manager's supposed to do. Thank you. Yeah. You're a form of escalation. Yes, you are in fact an escalator. Yeah. Great. Yeah, Lena? Absolutely. Once you start, it gets kind of harder to stop, right? Yep. Sometimes we're trying to put out a fire and we pick up the gasoline instead of the water. Yep. Sure. Yeah. So the team of people doing stuff is growing beyond the capacity of the team that's managing them, and thus sort of more reactivity happens, right? Sure. Reacting is a way to kind of feel like a hero, feel useful, like you're accomplishing stuff. So I was struck by something Nail said in his presentation earlier today about people are not strongly typed. And I really liked that. And one of the things that, as a manager, you're dealing with is an environment full of entities, if I can refer to my reports as entities, that are very difficult to predict, that interact with each other in very unpredictable ways. So I think a certain level of reactivity is probably reasonable. So I wrote I wrote weird prompts and things for myself on these cards. Excuse me while I'm shuffling them around. I remember having a conversation with a fellow technical manager who now works for Under Armour. He's like CTO at Under Armour. I don't understand how Under Armour has a CTO, but anyways, it seems really weird to me. Anyways, that's what he does. Hi, Paul. And we were talking about the mode of managers as being kind of like firefighters. And if you think about firefighters, where do you want them to be when your house catches fire? You want them sitting at the fire hall doing nothing. That is like the ideal thing for firefighters to be doing when your house catches fire. Because then the bell rings and they go, oh, and they react and go off. So there's a piece being a manager of having some slack, some space in your schedule that you can react. Because being reactive is actually, I'm just going to argue, is a little bit important for managers. That's all I'm going to really say about reactivity in managers, because the rest of this is going to be about activity in managers. I just kind of want to acknowledge that as managers, you have a responsibility to be available to your team, and I think that's actually important. Okay. So, what does activity mean for managers? I put this out to the room. As managers, what are the actions you take that are active rather than reactive? Yeah. Holding one-on-ones with your team? Yep. Sure. That's a chance for you to deliver things. Is that what you're thinking of? And to learn? Learning is active. Oh, that's great. Yeah. Just talking to them? Yeah. Talking about not work things, Dungeons and Dragons? Yeah. Other stuff that a manager can do that would be considered active? Hi. Assigning tasks and pushing them to learn. Yeah? Great. I'm going to jump all over the pushing them to learn because that's actually the entire point of this. But yeah, Natalie? Oh, I see. Not planning meetings, but meetings of planning. Got it. Sure, yeah, back there. Say a little more about that. Got it. Okay. So taking on some of what in some groups might be Scrum Master duties of just helping the team make sure they're getting their thing done in the right process. Got it. A couple things that I didn't hear come up that I just think are also interesting. I think hiring is an active thing that managers do when they're choosing people to join their team or defining what they want to join their team. That's an active thing. All of what Kevin was talking about in this previous presentation about how do you create process and how do you create process change in your organization is definitely active. I want to tell a little story, if you'll indulge me, about the dark days of, let's see, I think it was 2002. I was running a QA group in a company that did 3D rendering. We had our own proprietary 3D rendering software, which in 2002 was kind of a big deal. And the thing about testing 3D rendering software is that the behavior of the software depends enormously on the model that you use, its complexity, its size, the ways in which you rotate it, the other random things that are happening on the machine that's testing that software that's affecting the memory footprint of your 3D rendering software, because 3D rendering at that time especially, memory was a huge thing to be kind of aware of. So we were a small QA team. There was Tina, who was famous for being completely unseen. You never saw Tina come into the office. You never saw Tina leave the office. She was just either at her desk or not. And so we all called her Tinja. And then there was this guy, Vladimir. And Vladimir had this sort of, he was one of those QA people who had like this maniacal genius for finding bugs. Right? Developers hated it when Vladimir was assigned to their project, because Vladimir was going to find all kinds of insane bugs that demonstrated real problems in the app, but were just like, would baffle the developers. I can remember very clearly one day, after Vladimir had just been completely demolishing the developers' work day after day, they were getting very frustrated. And so they said, well, look, we're just trying to stabilize. And he's like, yeah, but it's not stable. What do you want me to tell you? They produced a build for him, and they came over to his desk. I was sitting next to him. They came over to his desk. So there's Vladimir, and he's got the new build. It's loaded up on his machine, and there's like 3 developers who are all Russian, standing around him, like, you know, determined that this time Vladimir will not defeat them. He boots up, you know, he brings up the software, and it comes up on a very standard sort of file open dialog, you know, select, cancel. And he looks at this for a second, and the developers are all like waiting to see what he's going to do. And he looks at the screen, he looks down at his keyboard, he looks at the screen, he lifts a finger, and he just hits the delete key for no reason. He just, like, pushes the delete key. Sure enough, the app is gone. It blows away memory. It just chooses, his whole machine goes down, and the developers all just kind of slink away. Anyway, that's what Vladimir was like. So I had these kind of weirdo QA people on my team. And we had this very complex software that failed in all kinds of spectacular ways that were really hard to predict. And I was kind of tearing my hair out trying to find a way to, I had hair. I was trying, that's what happened. I was trying to find a way that we could like usefully test this and provide real value to the company. But we didn't have time to develop like exhaustive test suites. And these were in the days long before there was any kind of automated testing or anything like that. You couldn't really do that sort of stuff. Not with Russian C++ developers, I assure you. No offense to any Russians here. I'm just... So I came across this thing called exploratory testing, which was developed by a guy named Kem Kaner, another fellow named Kent Beck. It's mostly forgotten now because manual testing is much less important nowadays in most software companies. But at the time, it was this really revolutionary idea, and I totally loved it. So I got Tinja and Vladimir and a couple others on the team together, and I said, this is what we're going to do. And the idea was around, not to get too deep into it, but the idea was around like figure out where this application breaks a lot and then just do random stuff in that area and just track what you've done rather than try to build a test suite of exhaustive cases that cover everything. So we took that on, and the team loved it. Vladimir built us a whole system for tracking our testing. Tinja went bananas with just like finding all the crazy picky bugs that she would find. And the dev team really loved it because they really could see that we were focusing our efforts not just on pushing random delete keys, but on focusing on helping them build a more stable product. So we ended up with a more stable product, and the team kind of pulled together around it. And the reason I'm bringing all of this up is because that was me sort of accidentally falling into this idea of using training as an active portion of management. That because I said to them, hey, we're going to learn how to do this, my team took that to mean this is the kind of team we're going to become. And that's what training is. Training is like an aspirational view into the future. So I want you to think for just a minute about what you told the person next to you at the start of the conversation, or what they told you, and think of that in terms of a vision of what that person wants to be. So that's an aspirational thing. Whenever we say, I want to learn something, we're talking about changing ourselves. And that's taking an active role in shaping our own destiny. Okay. Managers, how many of you have some kind of a training budget? Like there's some amount of money. Yeah? Great. Of those who have training budgets, how many of you have a plan? Like something that you've written down as to how you're going to spend that money? 4 of you? Okay. Yeah. So my point there is just kind of, I think that a lot of managers leave money on the table. That actually it's pretty easy to get budget for training. You probably already have budget for training. When you think of ways that you can kind of provide goals and directions to your team, training is something where you've actually got access to money. It's a pretty easy case to make for the most part. And training tells us things. When Shonda was talking about her martial arts practice, reminded me of my own martial arts practice and how when you get into or at least kind of martial arts that I do, there's a whole curriculum that stretches out ahead of you. And there's a whole community that has been doing this for generations. And so one of the things you're tapping into is a direction in which you can go. And training can provide that for your team. Has anybody here put forward training for their team? Anybody done that? Like, have you said to somebody, this could be as simple as, you should go to this conference and learn that thing. You should, yeah, okay, great. I saw 0 hands, I was like, oh, that's a little weird. Okay, can somebody tell me a little bit about a training, or tell us all about a little bit of training that they put forward for their team? Yeah, James.
I thought this one to come to this event.
And what does that, and to this one, what does that tell you?
In terms of the leadership, investing in my own professional development, but having a team that
Reaching out into the community and learning.
Like outside.
Right. Those are things that are important for your team. Yeah. Somebody else? Yeah, back there. Sure. And what is that telling your team? From that team, I assume. Yeah, what do you have? Gotcha. And so that they care about you and your future. And what do they envision? What does the future look like? Big. Yeah. Yeah, awesome. Counter to that, small. Yeah. Yep. Sure. So if you level somebody up, it helps the whole team. If you can level everybody up, the impact's even broader. Okay. If somebody says something and you can't hear what they're saying, please just yell at me and I'll try to repeat it. Can I ask specifically, what kind of training did you present to your team? Like any topics in particular? Yeah. Give me an example of new stuff.
Thanks, James.
or even better?
For example, machine learning as an
Machine
area.
learning.
Like Haskell. Haskell is a programming language, for example, or R, or some of these esoteric,
Yeah.
or to us anywhere, or Lang, or
Yeah.
functional programming, right? For developers, for the designers. So I'm talking graphic designers. I'm trying to get them to move toward going deeper down into the stack, so CSS and HTML, and getting some of that coding back.
Can we come back to like the machine learning and the Haskell and all the crazy stuff? What's the idea there? Is that someplace your team needs to go?
Not necessarily. I think, A, it's satisfying to learn something new. B, the exercise of throwing yourself out of your comfort zone is a really valuable one, because we have to do that on a regular basis for our clients. So building that mentality, that culture of stepping out of your 9 to 5, kind of, this is what I work with, my toolkit, and bringing new stuff on is, and then I think it also opens up avenues for exploration. That, hey, if we have one person that's using like a really heavily functional programming approach, and no one else is doing that, they can offer lunch and learn on that, and we can sort of decide, hey, you know what, this makes sense for the organization.
So your goal would it be fair to say that sort of your primary goal is establishing a culture of going beyond the boundaries?
I would say that maybe should be a primary goal. I think it's a beautiful side benefit. My first goal is still leveling up the team so we can do better work. Right? And,
that's what you said. I'm sorry.
But I think secondary, absolutely fostering that culture.
So thank you. I kind of want to, put this out to everybody. Like, what would you train your team on? And even if you're not a manager, if you're just kind of thinking about moving into management, if that's why you're here, that's great. Think about your team. What should they be learning? What should they be training on? For how many people is that an easy thing? Like, it's obvious what my team should be learning. Couple. I'm not surprised by that, because I would have had a hard time answering that. Do you have something you want to add to that? Yeah. Can you get Kevin a mic there?
Oh, no, just there's individual and then there's team.
Yes.
Right? So individually, they need different trainings based on what they need to grow.
Yeah.
Then as a team, it's usually like there's a technology we're moving to or something like that.
That's a great
more
point.
Team stuff.
Thank you. And I think this holds true regardless whether you're talking about individuals or teams. I'm specifically talking about teams, but I think it holds true. It is hard to think about, but when you think about your job as the manager, shouldn't you know this? Shouldn't you have some idea as to, in 6 months, in a year, here's what my team is going to need to be good at? Here's how my team needs to grow. Here's what's going to be hard for my team. If I get across kind of one idea today, a thing that I'm really passionate about, the reason really I came up here to get this talk, is I think that thought process can be super valuable for you, regardless of the answers you come up with. Is that thinking about, what is my team going to have to do that they can't do today? It's the other thing that comes up there is, what does my team want to learn? Offering them training that they're not interested in is, I know exactly how that's going to end. Teams have funny ways of showing that they're interested in something. I ran, this is a few years after the Vladimir delete incident. I ran software for a company that built gambling systems, which technically is super fascinating to build. Building casinos and horse racing stuff is fascinating from a technical side. You're working with criminals, but whatever. So our team had grown from about a dozen people to over 100, the dev team. The company had grown from perhaps 100 and some people to nearly 1,000. So suddenly we were this vast organization, and I was in charge of the software development, and unsurprisingly to anybody I'm sure who's been through this, nothing was getting done. Nothing could get delivered, nothing could get agreed on. We couldn't, by the time we got something delivered, the requirements had changed. It was a complete gong show, and it was all my fault. And I didn't have any great solutions. This is the first time I'd ever run such a big team. and I didn't really know what I was doing. My counterpart, the guy who was the CTO, who had basically tricked me into managing his entire team while he just did whatever he wanted, he had a little mini team that were just kind of doing fun stuff. They were still bogged down because they were caught up in the general organizational chaos. But Carl, unlike me, Carl is very much I know exactly what I'm going to do for this, and I'm just going to go get it done. And whether it works out or not, Carl never has any doubts. So Carl hired, and also Carl was a part owner of the company, so he could just write as large a check as he wanted. And he wrote a very large check and brought some very expensive consultants in to help the team learn new processes. And unlike most people's stories with really expensive consultants, these folks were great. These folks came in and they were badass developers. They were really patient teachers, and they got his team running on, at the time, seemed super exotic processes where they were like, they would all get up every day, they'd all stand and look at each other and speak quietly for 5 minutes and then go back and sit down. And we're all watching this going, what's going on over there? They had sticky notes all over the walls, different colors. They would move them every day. It was really strange. I was watching somebody learn how to do Agile, which I had never seen before. I won't tell you what year this was because it's kind of embarrassing. It was 2006. So what happened was that team started doing very well, and they started to at least enjoy their work. I'm not sure they really delivered much more quickly, a little bit, but they were clearly having a lot of fun. And it was very visible. Everybody could see what they were doing. And it was a way of exposing the rest of the team to a potential training, a potential aspiration for what they could be as a team. And all the other teams wanted to do this. And so that practice spread across the whole team. Everybody wanted to learn how to do this. And pretty soon there were sticky notes everywhere. And I can remember walking into the office, and we had this huge office, this entire floor of a building like this. And every vertical surface was covered in sticky notes. And not just the dev teams, the marketing team had sticky notes everywhere. The project managers had sticky notes everywhere. I don't have any idea what was on those sticky notes, but everybody took it over. So, training becomes a thing that people seek out, and that can tell you what your team's aspirations. When you offer them training or you offer them options, it's a great way for you to find out, what do they dream of? What do they want to become? Right? Because fundamentally, that's what a training request of any kind is. And so I have no idea how much time I have left. How am I doing? I'm sorry? I can't see James. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Great. I have lots to say. 6 minutes? Okay. I have not so much time. Okay. The thing is, when you make a training request, when you make a budget request to your boss, you're doing exactly the same thing to them. You're telling them what you aspire to, what you dream of for your team. When you say, I want to send every member on my team to this conference, whether or not that's a good idea, your boss now has really powerful information about what's important to you. 10 minutes, hooray. And what that enables you to do is have a conversation with your boss that ascends from your team's skills, your team's abilities, to your team's goals, right? Because if you're making a good case for training, you're saying, we need these skills in order to accomplish these goals. And to connect those goals to the business goals. And it's a great chance. I don't know about you, but I have worked at a lot of organizations where the exact business goals were often kind of hard to figure out. It was like, let's make more money. Let's make this sale. Let's double our headcount. Those kind of goals appear all the time, and they're kind of weird. Often it's kind of unclear what a company is actually trying to accomplish. Making a training request to your boss to say, hey, my team needs to improve their JavaScript skills. They need to learn Haskell if you're insane. All of these are ways for you to connect your team's activities, your team's capacity to your business's objectives. And whether you're right or wrong about what those business objectives are, you're going to have a really powerful conversation with your boss. And once again, go back to these conversations you just had with each other at the top of the talk? Yeah, that's what I'm doing. I'm doing a talk. Thank you. I'm not having a stroke. I'm fine. When you told somebody, what you want to learn, whether it was skydiving or martial arts or, God help you, Haskell, you're telling that person something about the kind of person you want to become, right? Or at least you're giving them information from which they will make deductions about the kind of person you want to become. And if you are in an environment that at least has good, healthy conversations, that's a really powerful way to do it, because there's actual dollars on the table. That's one of the reasons the conversation can get very specific, because it's not just about, hey, I think we should, have retrospectives on Thursdays instead of Fridays. Well, okay, maybe you do, maybe you don't. Maybe that's a good idea. I don't know. Don't deliver software on Fridays. If you do deliver software on Fridays, true story, make sure as it's happening, not only you, but the entire product management staff have gone to a chateau in Whistler and are completely unreachable. I guarantee you that is absolutely the best way to do that for you, as long as you don't mind getting fired. And with, because there's a dollar value on the training, there's the ability to verify, right? Was it worth $500 to send Lena to that workshop? That's a much easier case to make than, was it a good idea to move from Thursday to Friday, if in absence of any real data, right? We've heard a couple times today that it's hard to measure. It's hard to evaluate what you can't measure. And you can at least measure your spend on training. And so it becomes a thing where you can have very specific conversations. It also becomes a place where you can identify practices or assumptions that may be baked into your culture. I probably have time for one more story. Can I tell you one more story? Yeah? Okay. So this is just a couple years ago. This was at PagerDuty. Fantastic company. I love PagerDuty. I was there for a few years. And I did not get fired, just to be clear. PagerDuty did not fire me. Thank you for once. I was brought into PagerDuty to help improve their internal management capacity. PagerDuty was basically, it had been founded by a couple of Amazon engineers. It was full of super smart engineers. It still is full of super smart engineers. At that time, it was full of super smart engineers, most of whom had never been in a management role, many of whom had never had a manager. So things were kind of weird in terms of how management happened, how people got feedback, how tasks got assigned. It was a little bit weird. So I was asked to help develop some management training for them. The first thing I did was go to the executives, the senior leadership, and say, what is your vision for management? What do you think management is? And this is where I ran into these super smart folks who had never been bosses or had bosses or even really thought about bosses or management as a hard thing. Sorry, I keep putting the mic over here and you can't hear me. So there was no real vision as to what management ought to be at PagerDuty. And rather than try to have some kind of big, huge, day-long workshop where the senior leaders all figured out and argued about what kind of management they wanted, which would have meant working in a complete absence of data. And also there was no way we were going to get like a day of senior management's time for something like that. So all I did was I designed a really simple management curriculum. And I just created a bunch of really simple modules on things like setting one-on-ones and giving feedback and setting goals. And then we just ran that. And we ran the training and everybody loved it. The training was fun. And it useful skills and people learned stuff. And it was really interesting to see which aspects of that training caught on and which didn't. Running one-on-ones, everybody started running their one-on-ones. It was, morale was much improved. Giving feedback, that got a lot smoother. I don't know if you've ever had feedback given to you by people who are really smart engineers and are used to being really smart engineers and have always been the smartest engineer in the room. It's usually very accurate feedback. I'll say that. So the giving feedback went well. The goal setting, though, got really weird because I had advocated a specific kind of goal setting. I was like, here's how you should do it, and do this, and da-da-da-da-da, and we practiced, and then everybody went back to their teams, and they all set goals, and within 2 weeks, those goals were completely irrelevant to what the teams were doing. Invariably, completely across the company. Everybody had set all these goals, and then they never looked at them again, because they had nothing to do with how decisions were actually getting made, how product was actually being designed. And it was a great opportunity to sort of bring to the fore some real, dysfunction is probably too strong a word, but idiosyncratic behavior in the organization around how decisions were made. And so that you know, training is just so interesting because it's so specific. It's not opinion, it's not maybe we could do it this way, maybe we could do that way. When you're training people, you're making very specific claims about how you want things to operate. And it's really interesting when you train people on things and then you don't actually want them to behave that way. That's a great thing to discover about your organization. And if you have a healthy organization, like PagerDuty does, you then have really interesting conversations. So I've been talking a lot more than I thought I would. That always happens. Do we have time for a few questions? Is there anything in there? I hope the idea that a training plan can be like a vision for where you want to take your team. And if you're struggling on how to be more active, how to direct your team, how to give them direction, rather than simply putting out the fires and making sure that Fred isn't mean to Lucy or whatever is going on in your team, I hope that you'll think about doing a training plan. It doesn't have to be very complicated. It can be which conferences you think are the most useful. It can be, there's lots of online training materials, Coursera or whatever, that have all sorts of stuff that you can look through and offer to your team. But it's a way of being very intentional and setting a vision for your team. That said, I'm still pretty reactive myself. So.
Me too.
Thanks.